Thank you all very much. I'm a little nervous, so I might start off a little jittery, but I think once I'm in my comfort zone, things will get better. A lot of you, or some of you, may be interested in astrophotography, deep sky photography, where you need special expensive cameras and tracking mounts and guiding and all that. And I'm interested in that too, but I got started actually on an eclipse cruise. It was a 2-week cruise, the same cruise where I helped an international group of kids. We were on the Costa Classica, left out of China, and we're on a 2-week cruise to see the eclipse in 2008. And on that cruise, I met a photographer whose name is Berger. Some of you may have heard of him. He at that time, an Iranian photographer, and had a science, astronomy television program. Also authored some books and was quite a photographer. Babak and I became friends on that cruise, and he took the first nightscape picture of me, which is the night after, or the day of the eclipse. That night, we were in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Because it was a charter, the boat did not have all the exterior lighting, just the required navigation lights. And he took a picture of me with binoculars with the Milky Way in the background. I forgot to include it. And I took my first picture by taking the camera, using my cell phone just the screen of the cell phone to illuminate him, and took a picture with his Nikon camera. That was my first nightscape photograph, and I kind of caught the bug. That following year here at Stellafane, I bought my first used Canon 450D, I believe it was, and had it modified for astronomy. We can get into that later. And I've been doing this ever since. About 7 years ago, Babak and I held our first main retreat, basically a photography and astronomy retreat up in Maine. It's a week-long, all-inclusive event. And I've become better at doing this and better at teaching it, and I really like it, and it's just kind of a grab-and-go thing for me, more so than telescopes. Anyways, what nightscape photography is a combination of night photography and landscapes. So picture something like this, where you've got the stars, even the camera in there. This is the nightscape photography. Picture aurora with mountains in Iceland. You'll see some photographs of that. Picture the Milky Way. Picture time lapse. You'll see some of that too. It's not deep sky, but it can be deep sky, but there has to, in order to be called nightscape, it has to incorporate some terrestrial features. It may be a building, perhaps a moon right on the top of a skyscraper or something. I have some photographs of the moon on the Boston skyline, that sort of thing. This particular photograph was taken in Portland, Oregon. That's a lunar eclipse. I used a Canon camera set up on a little tripod. This is the Hawthorne Bridge, Willamette River, I believe it is. And I got basically just set the camera to shoot. It was the cloudiest night, and I had 2 frames out of an hour that the moon showed up. Every other time they were behind the clouds. I don't know if that's ever happened to anybody. Never. Talk a little bit about the history of astrophotography. So in our world of point-and-shoot photography, it's easy for us to take for granted that you just pull the phone out of your pocket and take a picture. A gentleman named Louis Daguerre in 1839 invented the daguerreotype. He named it after himself. And the daguerreotype was in a box similar to this. This is Mr. Daguerre. And people had to an exposure, see, I told you I was going to be nervous in the beginning. Exposure could be 60 minutes, and people actually, they had stands to hold people's heads still so that they could keep it still for 60 minutes and capture that portrait. Well, at the Harvard College Observatory, William Cranch Boyd got together with this guy Whipple, and Whipple had been playing with daguerreotypes. Boyd was the director of the Harvard College Observatory and the great refractor there, and said, hey, let's try some things. So in 1851, well, this is a picture of Mr. Whipple and Mr. Bond, so I said Bond. And this was one of the first photographs of a solar eclipse. It was taken at by the Great Refractor from Cambridge, and it's okay, it's okay. It's a good shot. This photograph, however, is a bit more famous. This was taken the following year by Mr. Whipple, and it's the first photograph that shows details on the moon. Now, it wasn't really the first one because the first picture was taken and got by Berger and got destroyed in a fire. His whole workshop caught fire. But this is the oldest surviving, and it is in the museum at Harvard. This one taken in 1851 by Johann Julius Friedrich Berkowski in Prussia, which is now Russia, was the first correctly exposed photograph of the solar eclipse. So let's fast forward to today. There's certain equipment that you need. I have all this equipment up here. First thing we need is a camera, and there are certain traits of this camera that would make it better than others. I'm going to not talk about smartphones here because they're getting better and better. That's a whole nother topic. You can take half-decent photographs or even better than half-decent photographs sometimes if you know what you're doing with a smartphone. I'm going to talk about more of the deep sky, high pixel. So we get a camera. It should be a DSLR or mirrorless. It should have an interchangeable lens. The pixel count should be somewhere between 20 and 30 megapixels. Now, I have a camera that's got 45 megapixels. It's the same size chip, though. Here's the chip, okay? We see here that the full frame is 36 by 24 millimeters, okay? It's the same size, but if I have a 45 megapixel in that same area, the pixels are going to be smaller, which means the pixels will not collect as much light over the same period of time. You want to collect light. Remember, you're doing nighttime photography. So something in the 20 to 30 pixel range works out really well. There are also full frame, medium format, APS-C, which is a smaller one. Some of the, if you got like the Canon TI or T series, and they have those. There's also micro four thirds. My cameras right now are all full frame. My first camera, though, was the APS-C camera, so it had a smaller chip. Okay, here's some examples of cameras that are sold today that are ideal for astrophotography or for nightscape photography. They come in all price ranges. Sorry, I keep blocking that. For around $1,000 all the way up to over $3,000. But if you're just you might already have one of these cameras or something similar, and that's a great way to get started. But if you want to get started, I think I paid $125 for the first camera that I bought here on the swap tables at Stellafane. You've got things like eBay and Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist and things like that, cloudy nights, where you can find a good starter set. The next thing you need is a lens, of course. And lenses are kind of special. They're really the key. A lens should be a wide aperture. Most of the time, if you were doing deep sky, you'd want a telephoto. Sorry about that. If you want deep sky, you're doing a telephoto, but you really want a wide angle lens, and you want what's called a fast lens. Fast means the f is a smaller number. The f is the focal is a fraction, so the smaller number. You want something like an f 2.4, a 1. This one right here is a 1.4, I believe, sigma. Yeah, 1.4. All right. So this has a wide open aperture. That means the ratio between the lens at the back of the camera and the lens at the front of the camera is smaller ratio. It means that more light is going to get in through the sensor. Okay? Telephoto lenses are useful for some types of deep sky photography, but in general, unless you spend a lot of money, a telephoto lens is going to have a smaller aperture, so you're going to have a longer exposure in order to capture a proper image. You want a tripod, and I learned this the hard way. I scrimped on my first tripod, and just a little breeze when you've got that exposure, the shutter open for 30 seconds, that little breeze is just going to cause that camera to move. It's going to blur your image. Even just hanging my little remote shutter cable from the bottom, some of you can see this, just blowing in the wind can cause a cheap Walmart-style department store-style tripod to shake and not hold your camera. A good rule of thumb is it should be able to be rated for at least twice the weight of your camera and your lens. Something else I use that's not shown here is a rock bag. So down here, a rock bag is actually just that. It's a bag that kind of hangs from the legs. Some tripods have a hook in the middle here, and you can hang it from that. And the rock bag is just that. You attach it to the legs or the hook, and you put rocks in it or whatever's there, bottles of water, your camera bag or something, to pull down on that tripod to make it more steady during your long exposures. The other important thing is it's got to be light enough to carry comfortably in the field. Carbon fiber tripods tend to be lighter, and you really appreciate the lightness when you are carrying these things into a field or hiking into a field. I've got a couple that are pretty light. I have an old steel tripod, an old Bogan steel tripod that I haven't taken out of the closet in a long, long time. And if anybody wants to buy it, okay. You also want a spare battery. The batteries, depending on what you're doing on your camera and the age of the batteries may not last a long time if you're out at night. You don't want to pack up everything and go to some remote site to do some photography, or get yourself all situated so that you know exactly when the moon is going to rise behind the Prudential Center in Boston, for instance, or a mountain or a hill or a steeple or something like that. And you get out there, and by the time you start shooting, you find out that your battery died. Another thing I've happened to me before, I filled memory chips, but what I've had happen twice is that the memory chips failed on me. So I went through a whole session of shooting, and this happened to me in Florida on one of my National Geographic programs where I was an assistant photographer. I took photos for a whole night, and we couldn't get them off the camera. They were there, we just couldn't. We wound up sending the chip to Canon, and they rescued it for us, but you don't want to be in that situation. So you want to carry a spare one with you. A remote shutter or an intervalometer. So if you're shooting a long exposure photograph, if you're doing a daytime photograph where you're shooting a 300th of a second, you're not really going to capture that motion of your finger hitting the shutter. But when you're doing something longer exposure, what you really want is you want a remote shutter. Some people use their phones, and I sometimes use my phone. This one hooks into this particular camera, and this is called an intervalometer. I can set this up to take a picture every 10-second exposure, every 20 seconds, or I can use the settings inside some of my cameras to do that automatically. But it also just has a button, and I can just click the button and shoot. It also has one thing I can do with the button is I can lock it down. By locking it down and putting the camera in a mode where it just keeps shooting continuously, then that means I'm just shooting over and over and over again. That's what I did for the time lapse that I did last night, one of the time lapses. The other thing you might consider is a star tracker. And star trackers are good if you want to freeze the motion. And I'm going to talk about star trackers a little bit. It wasn't originally part of this conversation, but I do have another presentation I do on star trackers, and I stole a few slides from there just to show you what the importance of that is. So, all this stuff costs money, and some of you might just want to get your feet wet. Maybe you're a student, or maybe you want to get this stuff for a student. I can't stress, I don't think I bought any of my I have not purchased any of my current cameras new. I've not purchased any of my tripods new, with one exception. My tracking mount is used. This tripod I got about 4 or 5 months ago, used. I don't spend a lot of money. That first camera, again, was only $125. It is actually a lesser model than this one here. And this one, a Canon 6D right now, you can get for about $600. So, but it doesn't have to be anything this fancy. Wait until you decide that you really like it or you're having a good time. Or maybe you could sell your prints and make some of that money back. Okay, I've used Hunt's Photo. I'm from the Boston area. Hunt's has a few stores around there. If you are from the Boston area, they also have a store in Manchester, New Hampshire, which doesn't charge sales tax. So if you're buying something there, it's a few $100s. It's worth saving the money. B&H Photo also has a special deal where you can get free shipping and avoid sales tax. Adorama, KEH, and MBP are both online marketplaces, and they're kind of unique in that they buy equipment. They'll buy your surplus equipment. They inspect it, and they clean it, and they do whatever it is. And if you buy it from them, you get a 6-month guarantee. So you get a 6-month warranty on it. So it's good. I purchased one of my cameras from KEH. Anyways. Okay. People always say, well, how do I set my camera up? I went out there and I set the camera on a tripod and I had all that stuff and I'm getting lousy images. Either they're overexposed or they're really noisy, or I'm not catching enough of the star image. So these are what I call the golden start settings. They're not the settings that are going to work for everybody. They're not the settings that are going to work for you all the time. But it's a good starting point because you should be able to get enough of an image to say, okay, I need a longer exposure, I need a shorter exposure. I really want to have the building and the moon in focus, so I'm going to have to play around with the aperture. And this is a good starting point. 10 seconds, set your lens aperture to f2.8, your ISO around 1600, and shoot in RAW mode. Quick thing about RAW, if your camera does RAW, and most of them do, a lot of us, when you shoot a picture, either with your phone or with a better camera, you see an image on the back, and that image is a compressed JPEG image. It cannot carry the color depth of a pure RAW image. The camera itself captured onto the sensor a lot more information than what you're seeing on the back of the screen. That's just a kind of a convenience image. Some cameras will give you the option of shooting RAW or recording an image in RAW and JPEG at the same time, and some JPEG only. And then JPEG itself, when you're recording with the Canon cameras anyways, and I believe also with the Nikons, you can say, well, okay, I want the highest quality JPEG with very little compression, or I want, medium or capture in RAW. There are image processing programs that will, even free ones, that will work with the RAW images. If you have to shoot with the JPEG, then please use the highest quality that you can. But you're still not going to get the color depth. I'm going to stop here for a second. Are there any questions? Because I've covered a lot. I'm going to try to make the presentation available online. Either we'll send something out. I think Mark is also recording the presentation, so the Stellafane will have these presentations online, and you can refer back to it. And I'm around today and tomorrow anyways, if you have any other questions. So any questions? Yes? Was that white balance? Yeah, so this was recorded on this particular camera, and this is a special circumstance because this camera has been modified to be able to capture the hydrogen alpha frequencies. Most of these cameras, in fact, unless you buy a specific camera that is designed, Canon put one out a few years ago called the Model RA. Nikon has an D810A for astronomy. The cameras that are not special have filters, okay? The sensor chip in it has filters in it that limit what it records to the visual spectrum, only things that you can see with your eye. It's done, I guess, for efficiency, and I'm not sure why it's done. This particular camera, which is a Canon 6D, I had modified. I sent it away to a place in Canada, and Night Sky Camera, I think they're called. And they actually disassemble the camera and pull that filter out, put a piece of clear glass in instead of it. and send it back to you, and it works really well. So with that, I have to always be conscious of the white balance, because taking that filter out totally messes up the automatic settings in the camera. In general, I'm at around 4800K for nighttime. Now, if you're shooting in RAW, if you shoot RAW mode, that color temperature has nothing to do with it. That will only affect JPEG, or the JPEG preview that is embedded in the RAW photo. Okay, so if you're shooting in RAW, you want to come close, of course, with your white balance. And there are ways that, with the Canon cameras, that I can say, I can tell the camera, look at this photo and adjust the white balance to be optimal. And then it will set it that way. But if you're shooting in RAW and you do post-processing in Photoshop or many, many other programs, you can always adjust that white balance again. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Focusing in the dark. I have these questions so many times. I had this question just last night. Well, how do you focus in the dark? It's really hard to do until you do it a lot. And these are my tips, and I learned them from other people. I didn't make this stuff up. You put your focus on infinity, all the way farther out. You're going to be close, but you're not going to be on. You're not going to be right on. You want to temporarily increase your ISO, which is kind of like increasing the sensitivity of your sensor in the camera. It's going to make things a lot brighter. You also want to temporarily increase your exposure to 30 seconds. Now, why do we do these two things? We do them because the cameras, the display on the back of the camera, or the viewfinder of these electronic cameras, simulates what the photograph is going to look like based on how your camera is set. If you're trying to focus on a star out there with your regular settings, you're not even going to see the star. It's going to be very difficult to see the star in your viewfinder or in the screen in the back of your... So by basically making the camera a lot more sensitive, you can see more stars. The trick is here, you point to the brightest star in the sky, and it might not be where you're composing. Last night, I forget where I was, somewhere over here, it was the brightest star in the sky. I was using a different camera, which was even harder to focus. And you get that bright star in focus, but what you're going to notice as you do it, you want to use your screen magnifier too. You should be able, most of the cameras, you should be able to magnify your image in the finder in the back. And then you keep turning your focus ring slightly, not just the bright star, but when they're in focus, the dim stars are going to appear in your finder also. And that's when you can tell that you've got a good focus. It takes a lot of practice. It's easy for me to say. I made it sound easy. You're not going to get it right the first time unless you've done it before. Am I blocking your view? Oh, okay. Practice makes perfect, and I can do it pretty quickly now. There's another way, too. For anybody that's done any telescope focusing, people use a Bahtinov mask. Okay, has anybody heard of a Bahtinov mask? Sure. What you do with the Bahtinov mask is you'll look at your star. If it's out of focus, it'll be kind of like this. And then when it's in focus, it's going to be perfectly symmetrical image. They make these for cameras. I tried them. It works, but it's another thing I have to carry in my bag and put on the lens and take off. And I just through practice got good enough in focusing without it. But if you're used to using that, then a Bahtinov mask is a good option. You can buy them on Amazon. You can buy them from B&H or Hunt's Photo and many other Adorama and many other online stores. Okay. I'm going to talk about star trackers a little bit and why you need them. Hopefully you can see here this device between the tripod and my camera. This device is a star tracker. And what it does, it kind of acts like your equatorial mount on your telescope. It's going to move the camera at the same rate that the Earth is turning, but in the opposite direction so that whatever you're aiming at stays aimed. You polar align it like you do an equatorial telescope. And this particular one, if anybody, some of the old timers maybe have heard of barn door trackers. That was my first one. 2 pieces of wood. Let me see if I can do it. 2 pieces of wood hinged here, and then you have a screw kind of that when you turn the screw, it causes them to separate. You put your, I'm not doing a good job. Anyways, you put your camera there so that as these 2 pieces of wood is what I use, were moving apart, the camera would rotate, and then you figured out how many threads or how many turns per minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes you would do to track it. It wasn't that accurate. It was my first one, I think, probably when I was about 16 years old, I made my first one, and it was okay. It was all right. But why do we need to track? Well, the Earth's rotating, we know that, and it's 15 degrees an hour, about a quarter of a degree a minute, which is 42 thousandths of a degree, or a little more than 15 arc seconds per second, okay? In 20 seconds, which is a typical exposure we'll talk about, the sky moves about 9/100ths of a degree. If I've got a 20 megapixel camera and a 24 millimeter lens, which is exactly what I have here, if I take a 20-second exposure, it means that my images move 7 pixels, I'm sorry. Let's talk a little bit about, now, for this particular example here, I'm on a fixed tripod, I'm not using a tracker. I've used the settings are 21-second exposure, the same 24 millimeter f1.4 lens, the Canon full frame camera, and fixed tripod, and this is a place called the Castle, Bancroft Castle in Groton, Massachusetts, and we can see Orion in there. But let's take a closer look at this, okay? So you can see the stars are smudged. They're not out of focus, it's just that they've moved, right? If we look in even further down to the pixel level, we can see here that in that 21 seconds, that star has moved, the center of that star has moved 7 pixels. So 21 seconds is too long an exposure. If I want pinpoint stars, 21 seconds is too long an exposure with this particular setup. Well, how do I know what the right exposure is? And now we talk about what's called the 300 rule. And something's supposed to be in that white box. I think it is an equation. Yes, it's white on white. Okay, the exposure, I'm sorry, I'll make sure this is corrected. The shutter speed equals 300 divided by the crop factor of the camera, and if you're using full frame, that would be a 1, times your focal length. So the maximum shutter speed for my 24 millimeter lens, 24 goes into 300, how many times? 12 times. My maximum exposure before I get noticeably tracked stars then is 12 seconds with this particular setup. Obviously, 21 seconds was too long. We saw that from the photograph. Wow. I rehearsed this thing so many times and didn't catch that. I'm sorry. Okay. In the old days of film cameras, they used to be called the 500 rule, and that's because the pixels, if you will, the bits, the grains on the film were a lot coarser than what we see on digital cameras today, so it wasn't as fussy. Okay, but nowadays we use the 300 rule, or some cases even the 200 rule, if you're shooting like a longer lens, a 135 millimeter lens. Because if I'm shooting 135 millimeters and I'm using a rule of 300, I've got basically 2.5 seconds before I start seeing smudges. Okay? For full frame sensor cameras, as I said before, we got about 12 seconds. For a crop sensor camera, some people have this R7, R10, or the old Canon 20D, or the 6. You got about 8 seconds, and for a Nikon and Sony crop sensor, I'll talk about this crop sensor in a sec, you've got about 8 seconds. What is the crop sensor? So if you've got a camera that is an APS-C or a micro four thirds, then you have to use a multiplier in order to figure this maximum exposure. You use the same multiplier to calculate what your lens effective focal length is. So if I'm using this 24 millimeter lens, but instead of on this full frame camera, I'm using it on a Canon crop sensor, APS-C, then I have to multiply that 24 millimeters by 1.6 in order to get the effective focal length. So that's approximately 24, 12, 36, maybe 40. It's effectively a 40 millimeter lens, and I have to use that 40 in my calculation for maximum exposure, not the 24. Maybe a little complex. Any questions? Yes?
What about lenses that are designed for crop sensors? Like if I'm using it on a Nikon, I use an EX lens. It's specifically designed for crop sensors. So the lenses are made either for full frame or crop sensors. You still have to do that.
I'm glad you brought that up. If you buy the lens that's designed for that crop sensor camera, then you can believe the focal length on it. In the case of Canons, I can use what they call the EFS lenses, which are the ones designed for crop sensor. I can use those on a full frame, and I believe you can use them back and forth. Okay, so that's when you have to do the calculation. I think the same thing with the Nikon also, which are the two most common. I want you to remember here that this rule is a guide only. And originally, as I said before, it was used for film grain on a 35 millimeter film. If you've got a high pixel count camera, my other camera's an R5 with 45 megapixels. It's more than double the pixel density of this one. It doesn't work. It also, we know as amateur astronomers, we know that the stars at different declinations have a different apparent speed going across the sky, apparent to us anyways. So this has to be factored in. This simple 300 rule does not factor that in. There's a calculation called the NPF rule. It's by a Frenchman, and I can't pronounce his name. It's somewhat difficult to do when you're head in the field. There are tools online. You can download an NPF calculator. You can use a program like PhotoPills, or Photographer's Ephemeris, or Planet, or some of these other ones. They have a little calculator in there. And I have used it, but for the type of work I do, I'm close enough. And if I do a shot and I see it's moving, I just cut down the shutter speed a little bit more, that's all. And if you really want to see all the stuff about it, there's a link right there which will bring you to a website that explains the NPF rule. Okay, so now we've got our camera, we've got it all focused, and remember, we set our exposure to be much longer than what we really want it. We set our ISO, or our sensitivity for the camera, much higher than we want. So the important thing is, and I stress this because I've forgotten so many times, the important thing is to bring these settings back to our ideal golden settings. 10 seconds f2.8, ISO 1600, and let's go. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about composing the shot. This is a nightscape photo. I caught the moon directly over Grade's Lighthouse in Winthrop, Massachusetts in 2016. There was a lot of planning because I had to know exactly where to stand. You know, if I was standing 20 feet to the left or right, the moon wouldn't have been over the lighthouse. I had to know exactly where to spin. And I was using an app called, actually I used an app called Berger. My friend does this using Google Maps, and I'm not even sure how he does it, but he said, no, we stand here. I go on to my phone and I bring up PhotoPills and I do a couple of calculations, and it will tell me within 5 or 10 feet where to stand. It's especially important here, not here, it's especially important if I wanted to get the moon rising over the lighthouse, because I wouldn't be able to see it before it rose, so I still need to know where to stand. We also have to talk about depth of field a little bit. Depth of field means, is it in focus here, and is it in focus there? I've got the lighthouse there. That was pretty far away. That was 8 miles away. I didn't really have to worry so much about depth of field between the 8 miles and the 250,000 miles of the moon. However, if I've got a building half a mile away, and I had this happen to me. It's part of another presentation. A Mercury transit. I was in Providence, Rhode Island, the capital of Providence. The Capitol building has a statue on the tower, the top of the tower. It's called the Independence Man. And our goal was to get the Independence Man and the sun with Mercury going across it. It was about 3/4 of a mile away from where I was standing. My photo partner over there, of course, had been doing it since he was 16. His came out perfect. Mine, the moon and Mercury were not in focus. The statue was in perfect focus, even though it was 3/4 of a mile away. That was in perfect focus, but the moon and Mercury were not. So we need to know what this is, and one of the calculations is called hyperfocal distance. It's the smaller your aperture, the more depth of field you have. Now, I told you before that we want a large aperture for nightscape photography. The photo I did of the moon and the lighthouse was not done technically at night. It was, well, maybe just around sunset. But it's called the hyperfocal distance. We can use some tools like this to figure out, in this case, we've got, say a subject is 25 feet away, and I'm using an f5 lens. I want to have my focus at about between 23 and 26 feet away from me, and at that point, everything behind that is going to also be in reasonable focus. Hyperfocal distance. There's one of the moon shots I did. This is the Boston skyline. This was done on January 1st, 2016. And this was an interesting photo. It's one of a series of photos, and we were catching the moon as it was setting, and I have a heavy tripod, that metal steel one, my first one, and I had to keep grabbing the tripod, plant it down, compose and take my shot, but the moon's moving. I mean, it's pretty close to these buildings. You can see it. You can just watch the moon moving. So I'm running like this again to get the right angle to get the moon between some other buildings. And I shot a series of a few of these with the moon gradually coming down. Hyperfocal distance. These buildings, I shot this from the Hyatt Hotel at Logan Airport across the harbor. It was about just under a mile. And I was careful, and my shot was so good that in some of these photographs I can see people in these buildings, and one of these windows, you can't see it in this version here, but I can read the clock on the wall, so I know I was in focus there. And this was done with a 24 millimeter lens, not that one, a different one. This was done at our workshop in Maine. We have a little bit of aurora once in a while, and as somebody mentioned earlier, lots and lots of satellites. I have a video taken from this same location. It was a 22-minute video. I counted 202 satellites. 20-minute video. This was shot in Chicora Lake up in New Hampshire. You got the perfectly focused tree in the foreground and the Milky Way in focus. Hyperfocal distance, starting off with those golden rule settings. Magdalena, New Mexico. Some of you here might know John Briggs. This was taken from his property in Magdalena, New Mexico. It was July 4th, 2021. This glow in the horizon is fireworks. And most of the clouds, a lot of the clouds in this and subsequent photos are actually the smoke from the fireworks. They're about 2 miles away. But the Milky Way was really beautiful there. This was taken from the Hotel Ranga, about an hour from Reykjavik, Iceland, on one of my eclipse trips. I'm a photographer's assistant on some of these tours. And this was beautiful. This was an aurora curtain going basically from there to there. It was just amazing. This screen doesn't do it justice. It was so colorful, it was just beautiful. An interesting story about the same light is I set up 2 cameras, one in the front of this hotel in the parking lot at about midnight, and one in the back where I was here. And about 4 in the morning I went out and I couldn't find the camera in the front of the building. And let's just say I should have used a rock bag because a breeze came and knocked the camera over. Broke the camera. It had a fairly expensive lens on it, which is my 8 to 15 millimeter Canon fisheye lens. The lens I sent to Canon, and they nothing really wrong with it. The camera itself, though, was my first Astro modified camera, and I sent it to Canon, and they said, "Well, there's no chip. We have to unmodify it, and this and that, and replace." So I just said the heck with it and sold it to a friend for a really cheap price, and that's what he's using to get started in nightscape photography. Another one of my Iceland trips, Vatna Kojul. This was a national park. These are all glaciers here. This is Mike Drewer. He's spoiled my thunder there. This is Mike Drewer. He's a member of AtMob. Interesting thing, I met Mike. Mike came to one of the workshops in Maine with his wife. He didn't have any equipment or anything, and we're out on the pier on the lake, the dock on the lake, taking pictures of the moon setting. I said, "Mike, why?" Oh, and he's laying on a lounge chair. I said, "Mike, why'd you come?" He says, "My wife said I had to come and carry all her gear." Since that trip, Mike's got about 3 cameras now, a few tripods, 2 telescopes. He really caught and he joined AtMob too. So, this was just beautiful, just beautiful. And again, the color on this screen doesn't do it justice. Has anybody ever been to Iceland and seen aurora? The color? Kind of the reddish, you mean? Yeah. I think it's a little bit of both. There is red in the photo. There was red in the photo. But this particular, the yellow color cast, you mean like this stuff here? Yeah. That's all reflection from the aurora on the ice and snow. Yeah, everything, if it was green, the ice and snow, it glows green. It's just really, really beautiful. If you ever have a chance to go to Iceland or Norway or Alaska during aurora season near the equinoxes, go and practice your nightscape photography. This shot was not one of mine, but I wish I was there. This was also Iceland, and Jennifer Franklin went on one of Babak Tefreshi's photo tours in 2023. And they were at this place, I forget what they call it, something henge, anyways, in Iceland. And a fireball lit up the sky. Jennifer very quickly processed her image and sent it to APOD, Astronomy Picture of the Day, and this was the featured picture on September 16th. Okay, but nightscape photography, this was taken during a nightscape photography, basically workshop in Iceland. This is the view at our astronomy retreat. The building in the middle is our pavilion. It's not really lit up that bright, but the camera makes it look bright. Everything's under red light. And this was not our best night, but even the clouds are nice, to catch nightscape. It's not all about stars. And these are not shot as video. These are all full, just full frame images stitched together in Photoshop or a program called LR Time Lapse or Lightroom. And there are free, even I use a Mac now, so QuickTime does these things too. this was shot last night, and I don't know how good it's going to show up. I didn't have a lot of time to process it. Let's see what happens. It's a little bright in here. We can see the Milky Way darkening. These started about 9 o'clock and went till 7 o'clock this morning. Just one frame approximately every 12 seconds. And I just did this really quickly. I broke my own rule, and these are all JPEGs that are stitched together just because I had about an hour before this put it together. I did another one using a fisheye lens from basically shooting north from the base of looking up towards the McGregor, and you could see kind of like the one in Maine, everybody roaming around and moving around with the red lights and things like that. About 3 in the morning, the clouds rolled in. And it gets brighter and brighter and brighter. The technique I used here was I used a manual settings on the camera, and I set aperture priority. I got the shot kind of the way I wanted about 9 o'clock last night, exposed the way I wanted, but I let the camera decide the time. Each of these, I believe, was 8-second exposure, but I let the camera vary the aperture so that it would let more or less light in based on what it sensed. So I got kind of an even show here, but I finished this up just before. It took me about an hour, and normally I would take a lot more care and use some of my other tools to put together something a little nicer. Any questions? Yeah? Hey, Mike. Yeah, sure. So, good question, really good question. I have nowadays, if you're on social media anyways, or some of these sites, you're going to see sometimes that people use trackers and track the sky. The sky stays still in the image, but the landscape moves, okay, which is counterintuitive, but it's been a cool thing for the last year or two. Some trackers, this one does not, but I have one by Ioptron called a Sky Guider. That one has a medium rate. It's kind of a compromise between tracking the stars and tracking the land. So instead of full sidereal rate, it's tracking at half the rate. It gives you some flexibility. It doesn't limit you, and you can get pretty much. Now, the other way to do that, of course, is you can do a composite. You could shoot the land and use a completely different set of settings, same lens hopefully, but you could shoot the land. You could shoot the land in the daytime and then come back and use a tool like Photoshop or Lightroom or some of these, maybe not Lightroom, but Photoshop or some of these other tools, and you can put your whole sequence there and just leave that still shot with the land. Does that answer your question? Any other questions? Yeah? Do I ever remove them? Illuminate, yeah. So as I talked about in the beginning of my talk, when I was on that cruise ship for the eclipse, Babak took my photograph with his Nikon camera, and he pulled his cell phone out and just used the screen of his. Cell phones back then didn't have flashlights in them, at least mine didn't, his didn't. But I think it was a flip phone. He just opened it up and the screen was bright enough just to illuminate for the 2 or 3 second exposure. I use red lights, I use colored lights. I do sometimes some fancy things where we take light wands and we do like this while we're shooting. But yeah, I illuminate them. I have some small lights with small tripods that I can strategically place so that you don't see the source of the light, but you illuminate. There's a church, and I can't remember or pronounce the name of this church in Iceland, but it goes back hundreds and hundreds, or maybe even longer than that, years, and it's basically grass. It's made of sod. It's a sod church. And we were out in this really, really dark area. There's a waterfall going on over there. And the Milky Way, we were hoping to catch aurora. The Milky Way is up there. And we set up some lights illuminating. The waterfall was probably 500, 600, 700 feet. Somebody just hid a couple of lights in the bush. Just enough. You don't need a lot because your camera's set for night mode, so it's really sensitive anyways. And then also on the church, and got some good shots. I don't have any of those here to show. Any other questions? Yeah?
When you focus on one bright star and then get the other stars in, have you ever found a lens that's focused to infinity and you can't, it won't let you beyond? Wall lenses give you certain enough.
I can see where that's been the case, perhaps, if you've bought a lens that's not specific for the camera. I did have a cheap lens once that did that, but usually the lenses are designed so that the real infinity is not at the physical limit of the lens. It's a little bit before. So you do have you do have that little bit of extra. It has to do with maybe somebody using an adapter or a filter that brings the lens a millimeter further away from the sensor or closer to or something like that, or maybe not a good match that way. Yeah.
Why with digital cameras, why isn't infinity infinity? I mean, you should have built analog, you put it at infinity and it was perfect.
Well, you can go back to analog if you want. I started that way. I had a dark room. I helped found the camera club in both my high school and junior high school. Why isn't... I think it's because there's tolerances, right? And the cameras are made, and then different lens companies are making the lenses. I don't know why. I think you really want that little bit of extra just to be able to tweak it just perfectly. That's my guess. Sounds reasonable. Yes. He's just water. Anybody else? Great. I hope I answered some questions. I'm around. My tent is right up here, actually, at the end of the walkway. If you have any questions, if it's clear tonight, I will be out there with some cameras. If you have any questions, if you have equipment, if you need some help learning that focus, or questions like, gee, I have this set up, will it work, or can you help me make it work? I'm happy to help you out for as long as I'm here. Thank you all very much.